So we're talking today about communicating with the ex after divorce, but not just communication, not like from the communication skills standpoint, but the ability to get outside of your own perspective and your own head and take a step into their shoes with empathy and understanding when it's the last thing you feel like doing or the hardest thing to do. So, but it's critical at that point if you want to feel better, which is always, I think our focus is always just on how to get people to make it through that time, feeling as good as they can under the circumstances. So that's where we'll focus it today, is basically just looking at the ex's perspective, basically trying to get out of your own perspective and over into your ex's perspective after separation and divorce. How do you think you went at that initially, and then how did it get better over time for you?
Yeah, definitely something I struggled with in the very beginning. You know, I think back, you know, the emotional state that you're in of, you know, in a lot of men's case, I'm sure women are like this too, but, you know, a lot of men are feeling blindsided. There's a lot of emotion. If one person felt blindsided and the other person was sort of mentally prepped for the divorce, there's a lot of emotions in the beginning. And when you're emotional, you're not making conscious decisions. You're not making good decisions. You're making a lot of mistakes, saying the wrong things. I was certainly in that position, said a lot of things that I'm not the proudest of today, but you go through those things and you learn how to be a better person, how to be a better communicator. And the emotional part of this gets easier. You know, the first couple days, weeks, months, years, for some people, it's hard. And you don't know how to communicate with yourself, let alone anybody in the outside world, let alone the person that just broke your heart. And especially if you have kids, you don't really have a choice. You gotta have effective communication with them. So thinking about what their best interest is, or thinking about like how to effectively communicate with them, is probably the last thing on your mind. How to make their life easier is probably the last thing you're worried about at that moment. But as your emotions get better, as you calm down, as your new normal starts to set in, I think the communication gets more effective. And it really, so for me, I have a few things and we'll get into them, but is that something that you struggled with as well?
Yes, I struggled to definitely get outside of my own head and my own pain and my own journey and look at it from his. Absolutely, I did, yeah. And looking back on that now, you realize how many opportunities you did have to think about it from their perspective, but it just doesn't really happen. I think if someone had been able to help me through that, someone who had been through it before, who could say, have you thought about looking at it this way? I would have been open to it, but it was just at that time I was so in the fog, in the cloud, that it was all about me. And that's normal, like natural and normal, but I think that's why this is great. So if someone is hearing it, it could prompt them to do that. And I am talking to a couple of people now through the coaching that have said, when I've mentioned this type of perspective, they've gone, yeah, I never thought of it like that actually. And there's a softening. And that is why I want to get this out there, because when people hear it, they might stop and think about how they might be able to do it themselves. Let's talk about the very beginning where it was tricky. So when you were in the point where you couldn't see it from her perspective, are you comfortable to talk about the ending and why it ended? There was an attempt to have an open marriage, which kind of failed. That would have been trickier to get into that perspective of her point of view, I'm guessing. How did you then go from getting outside your own head and into her head to be, you know, it must have been very difficult to do that. So how long were you not able to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think for me, because I have a business mindset naturally, it quickly changed. I'd say within 2 weeks, it changed from emotional heartbreak. This is now a business decision. We've got assets to divide. We've got children to be mindful of. What's going to happen with the house? What's going to happen with the cars, the credit cards, the money, the retirement accounts, you name it. It's a business relationship at the end of the day. and this is what I do. I'm very comfortable in this world. I don't
Yeah.
know the other stuff. I got to figure all that
Mm.
stuff out, but I know this world and I know how to negotiate. And so that was the first trigger for me of like, okay, I got to think about the psychology of negotiation. What does she ultimately want? And what do I ultimately want? And so this episode is not about the art of negotiation, but it does put you in the mindset of like, I have to think about what the other person's intentions and desires are and balance that with what I want and what I need to get the desired outcome. So that was my first foray into like trying to think like her and try to think about what she wants.
How do you get into empathy for their pain? You're in a lot of pain too, and we just have to get through this together. We just have to get each other through this, not as a couple, but as two people who have loved each other once and still have children to look after. So that's the part I want people to be able to possibly fast forward a little bit if they can, is to think no matter what is going on with your ex in the beginning, so and so down the track, co-parenting, they're going through their own struggles, they're going through their own pain, and you won't see it probably. They will probably go out of their way to hide it from you specifically. There is an element of, I don't want you to see me struggle. I don't want you to see me on my knees. I'll show you that I'm doing all right. I can make it through this divorce pain. And it's really important to come back to humanity and just remember that everyone's really gone through something, whether they show you or not. A little caveat here, there are abusive relationships and there are narcissistic abusers who actually love to see you on your knees and all that sort of shit. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about personality disorders, just to be clear.
Yep.
I'm talking about two people who can, at the end of the day, probably after a really long time, will only want the best for each other. So.
Yeah, a lot of that. So I think you and I have a very similar story in that, new relationships started either before the divorce or immediately after. I've known my ex since she was 14, since I was 16 years old. At the end of the day, I'm still here for you. Like, I still have love for you. Me being in love with you is no longer. I'm not attracted to you anymore in that kind of way. But even today, if she was sitting right here, I would still tell her, she's one of my better friends. I've forgiven her for the things that she's done. I've come to grips with the idea that everything happens for a reason, and that through the pain that she put me through, I'm able to have this conversation with you and many others, and I'm a better person for it. And so by saying that, subconsciously, what that's doing is putting her wall down. It's being vulnerable so that she can feel vulnerable. It's not always like spiteful and angry. Like,
yeah.
There was a lot of those conversations, right? You're just screaming and shouting at each other, sometimes having police called. The kids are here. Like, sometimes you just got to lower the temperature. And you know what? If I said to her, I still have love for you, I still have your best intention at heart, and she said, fuck you, I never want to hear from you again. Okay. I chose the high road. And I understand, like you mentioned, some people's exes they're not receptive to that idea. Mine was, and I'm thankful that she was. Yeah, I think to the person that's going through that today, like, there's a lot to be said about, stop, think about the pain that you're going through. Even though they're not showing it, they're probably going through that same pain. Find some common ground where you can just say, hey, I still have love for you. I can't say that I'm in love with you or that I want to be with you anymore, but I do want to be amicable. I do want to find a resolution to all of this, both on the emotional side and on the monetary side and all that kind of stuff that works out for you. I'm not your enemy. We're not on the same team the way we were, but we don't have to be enemies either. And I think that sort of mindset works for everybody, other than the attorneys. The attorneys don't like to hear that because they want to make money off of you guys fighting, but
Oh, exactly, which is why you've got to stop fighting.
That's right. Save your money.
Yeah, stop fighting for that reason alone. Your point about being vulnerable is really important. I think what happens when I see it going on is that the wall goes up on this side, the wall then goes up on this side, it goes higher on that side, higher on the, and it just gets so high that now we're both fucked, right? It takes somebody to just bring it down a little, and it might not happen straight away, and you might do it and it might never happen, and you might think, well, it's a lost cause. But the first step is to try it yourself. So if you're at loggerheads and you're trying to find empathy, just show a little bit of empathy yourself and show a little bit of vulnerability yourself. How did you show her your vulnerability?
To me, it's, I love metaphors. This is a fire. Your divorce is a burning flame sitting right here on the floor. And you have two choices. You have a can of gas sitting right here, and you got a bottle of water right here. Do you want the flame to go higher and for things to get hotter and more out of control and make your life even more miserable? Or do you want to start bringing that temperature down? You want to start bringing that fire and putting it out and start to move on. So you have a choice. You can't control what they do. The only thing you can control are your thoughts and your actions. So lead by example. Be the one that is vulnerable. You may have to do it multiple times. It may take weeks. You may have to just sit there and get yelled at and say, you know what, I'm not resorting to that. And strategic empathy is sort of an oxymoron, but the idea that you have a goal of getting through this divorce and becoming amicable with your ex. How can you give them something so that it brings that temperature of that fire down? What is it that they're looking for? Whether it's could be money, could be visitation, could be something romantic, I don't know, whatever it might be, and just telling them, like, I feel for you. I understand that this is rough for you, and we're both in the same boat. Like you said, we're going through this. We're separate, but we're going through it together. We're both going through it at the same time, and know that I'm here for you. And with some boundaries in place, I got you. If something really goes wrong, if you have a real emergency, I got your back. I've known you for however long. We're not strangers today. I still have boundaries, but within reason, I'm here for you. Even if it's just a talk. You want to grab a coffee? That's fine. Don't swing on me when you see me, but I'm down to get a coffee. That goes a long way.
There's two things you said that are really vital there. And one of them is that sort of, what do you need from me? What I really think people want the most is just understanding. I think nearly everybody, as long as they're not in that personality disorder basket, just wants understanding. Like, acknowledge that what I'm going through is really hard, painful, because whether people think it is or not, if they really don't think it is, probably there's an element of denial or suppressing of some grief, because when you've got children, it would be unusual to not be grieving over the loss of your family when you've got children. Everybody, when they have those kids, are looking ahead to a future, right? You imagine your kids growing up, and now you have to see your kids going through something. So there's going to be that element of grief. So I think it's that, understand that, and ties into your second point. We're not together, but we're separate, but we're together. What a crazy concept for people to get their heads around. We're broken up, we're separate. In the past, when you break up with a boyfriend, girlfriend, see you later, probably never see you again unless it's social media. Now it's like, we're not together, yet we are so linked for the rest of our lives, intrinsically and importantly, that we now have to do this apart together. And that's why it's so challenging. That's why divorce is, and co-parenting is probably one of the most challenging relationships to navigate. What other type of relationship has that many dynamics, really, and that much history and passion and love and just like all that, but you're not together anymore. So two really good points there. So giving your ex, co-parent, some understanding might probably be the overarching word, because so many things come under understanding. So for example, if you need more money, okay, I can understand, as long as you're genuine. or I just, you're down and things aren't going right, or something's happening in your family, I'll just give you some understanding, or you can't pick the kids up this week, you miss the kids more this week. Just little things, just give them some understanding, even when you don't feel like it. When you
I want
don't
to add one more
like
thing to that too, and think about the long game. Like, especially if you have kids. In my case, my youngest is now 7. I have to interact with my ex for at least 11 more years until she turns 18. You're going to have to interact. You're going to have to change your schedule for visitation. You may have to borrow money from that other person. You may have to ask them for a favor. You may need help moving a box. Whatever the fuck it is, think about the long game. Every second that you spend thinking about what do they need, what do they want, you're essentially building up credit for them. Think about it as like your credit score. You're saving $1. You're building up, future empathy on their part.
Yep.
You may need a schedule change this weekend to accommodate whatever it is that you're going through. Next weekend, it might be her turn. You're going to want to repay that favor. It can't just be, I'm hurting and fuck you. It's got to be, I'm hurting and I know you're hurting too, and we're going to get through this together. I will also add this. The pain that I went through at the beginning of my divorce, I don't think was the same pain that my ex went through. However, I think her pain was delayed until that relationship broke up, which is why I talk to her once or twice a week now about this, because she just delayed that pain. She just numbed it with somebody else. And we talk all the time about confronting it and dealing with it and healing from it, not just numbing it with another relationship or drugs and alcohol or whatever other things are. So just because they're not going through it when you are doesn't mean that they won't go through it one day. So if that makes you feel better, I don't know.
It probably will come out later. That's what I mean. So I think people might go, sometimes you might say, that person's not suffering the way I am, and I actually want them to suffer a little bit just because I am suffering so much. God damn it, I need you to suffer too. And we are mindful of the fact that we're not saying it can happen straight away. It can happen at different times. But if you're aware, even just aware that it's something that you could be doing for yourself, not for your ex, for you, to start to think, is there another way I could be looking at this? Is there another perspective I could take to just help me give a little bit of understanding, vulnerability, and maybe in time that may go both ways. And you said the long game. It is the longest of games. And legally you're there till they're 18. But think about beyond that, when they have children, possibly they may or may not have kids, but in their lives and their endeavors and family things that get I have no doubt I will be seeing my ex-husband till I am shuffling off this earth, regardless, because our kids are we're friends anyway, but our kids are very much, going to be our focus for the rest of our lives. The long game, the rest of your life.
If you would have reminded me that like a week after my divorce, I probably would have hung up on you. Like the idea that I got to deal with this for the next however many years I'm still on this earth is terrifying. But if you start to think different, if you start to be mindful, this whole podcast is predicated on a mindful divorce. If you start to think about what am I going to do to contribute to the healing, and I can only worry about myself, but I can think about her or his wants and needs to try to help me heal. It's twisted, but ultimately that's the long game we're talking about.
Twisted is the word, right? Because it's like, it's hard for us as humans to twist into that other, to do the turn. It's like, this is now how do I turn it around? Reframing. You take your thoughts and you have to turn them around. And it's very tricky, it's hard. It's human psychology, it's human nature to just focus on our one thing. But one thing that is interesting is you now have a pretty good amicable co-parenting relationship with her. I have a good co-parenting relationship with my ex-husband. So we're two examples of how yes, it's very difficult. And I like how you said you would have hung up on me in the first week of divorce, because that shows when you're ready, you will start, and not
That's
before then. And we wouldn't expect anyone, if you're listening now and going, oh, it's all good for you guys, it's not going to be like that for me. You're just not ready. But just hearing it, and then a few months down the track, maybe, you know, it'll start, you've heard it. And so you can't unhear it, and it might just start to permeate. And it's just a new idea that you could ponder and reflect on and wonder about trying yourself, and thinking what's one little step I could give to be vulnerable. Even when he's doing something that's annoying me and pissing me off, I will still try and, okay, what would it be like if it was me in that situation, and help him out for the good of the kids and the good of the whole relationship moving forward.
And I would add that it's okay to tell him he's annoying and he's pissing you off if you have the right sort of intention behind it.
I did, and I actually recently had to tell him that he could tell me that I was pissing
There you
him
go.
off, because he was like,
there's
I
your
could tell
empathy, right? You're
Yeah.
saying, you know, I can handle it, dish it back.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you, if I'm pissing you off, just tell me, I don't care. Like, we can't get to where we need to get to unless we're both telling each other these things. So constant work in progress. But these types of you know, ideals and ways of looking at things can be very, very helpful. So hopefully anyone who's watching now does get something out of this today, which is just, yeah, just taking that step back, zooming out, bigger picture, long game, be vulnerable. It isn't fair, and it isn't just sometimes, but that's life. So, you know, just keep on with the bigger picture.
I have 3 other suggestions that I don't think we got to.
Yeah.
And I definitely want to make sure they get included in the video, because this is a very valuable video, maybe one of our most. The first thing I had on my list is don't assume anything. Don't assume you know what they're thinking, or what they're doing, or what they're not doing, or what they're not thinking about.
Yes.
You know, ask questions. Don't cross the line. Don't ask them, like, you know, be mindful of the things that you're asking. Be mindful of the things that you're thinking about that lead you to asking the question, but don't assume anything. What's the old phrase? Assuming only makes an ass out of you and me. Like, it stays true even in divorce. The second thing is, don't take anything personal. The person that you were married to, that you were in love with, that was your wife or husband, is not that person anymore. Don't take it personal. It's not emotional anymore. The other person might have checked out emotionally a year, in my case, a year and a half early, 2 years early. You're just checking out now. So don't take it personal. Although I think that's really, really hard, especially in the beginning. And the last one, stick to your word. Be accountable to yourself. Do what you say you're going to do. Don't do what you say you're not going to do. If you say, I'm going to set a goal this week of not stalking my ex, don't stalk your ex this week. And the next week it'll get even easier. Like, and if new information comes in that makes you change your opinion or your thought, explain that. You know, don't assume anything, but also provide the information that the other person needs. It goes a long way in the relationship healing, because there will be a relationship after divorce.
Absolutely. Don't take things personally, and try not to take things too seriously as well, is what I would say. Because like I said, when my ex-husband did get together with his new partner and all that stuff came down, I mean, I went through all this thing, and then they split up a few years later. So, you know, don't take it all so seriously. And it sounds a bit weird when you're talking about something as serious as divorce, but it's kind of like, it's like a life and a mindset outlook anyway. It's just like, you know, loosen up a little, let go of a few things, don't take things so seriously. And that's a hard one to hear when you're in divorce, but let go of a few things when you can. But those are, awesome points, and I'm glad that you got them in to the end there. So thanks very much. It's been awesome talking today, and enjoy the rest of your sunshine.
It's a beautiful day. Thanks.
And we'll see you on the next podcast.
Yeah, love it.